Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're continuing the Hachaim Hakadosh. We're on Parshat Vayetzei, Parak Lamed Pasuk Yudalet. We're right by Rabbi. In this week's Parsha, there's many interesting storylines throughout the whole Parsha. And even though they're all connected to each other, they all contain, a lot of them, especially if you learn Hachaim and other Sifrei Chasidus and other Svarim, a lot of deep mystical and Kabbalistic secrets. One of the more interesting stories that on face value obviously is not really what's going on is the story of the negotiations, it seems to be at least, between Rachel and Leah, where Rachel asked Leah to give over to her the Dudaim. What are Dudaim? Dudaim are special flowers that have enhanced abilities to help people have children. They're infused, seems to be, with certain types of herbs or chemicals, natural herbs, to help a lady have children. And Rachel obviously at that moment did not have any children. And Leah had Dudaim from Ruvain, as the Pasuk says, he went out to fields to collect these Dudaim to give to his mother. And Rachel asked her it. Now, Dudaim, at least Rashi says in Arabic, are known as Jasmine. There's other midrashim that say that Dudaim grow in the shape of a person. That's the sign that these are the Dudaim that have the special abilities to help women have children. And there seems to be a negotiations back and forth, which we're going to see in the Hachaim, of if I give you the Dudaim, says Leah, then I want to be able to live with Yaakov. So on face value, it seems very funny that two Noshim Tzidkanias would have negotiations over this type of personal matter. But obviously, as we know, these were tzaddikim, tzidkanias, neviim, right? Great leaders of Klal Yisrael, mothers of the shivatim, the shiftei ka. So obviously, as we're going to learn in the Hachaim, there's something deeper and more altruistic going on. So we're going to learn the whole parsha, starting from Pasuk Yudalet, and in the Hachaim, it's actually Pasuk Tezvav. Hama'at kachtech. What happened was, Rachel comes to Leah and asks her, please give me the Dudaim. Obviously, she didn't have any children, and she wanted the Dudaim to be able to have a potential to have children. So Leah got upset and said, it's not enough that you want these Dudaim, you also want to take my husband from me. What does it mean you want to take my husband from me? We both live with Yaakov. We both, right, are married to Yaakov. Now, just as a side note, each Isha, especially in the olden days, had her own personal tent where she lived. And based on whatever arrangements were made, that's where the husband would live, on a nightly basis. But Yaakov did not have his own tent, as it seems to be. Each Isha had her own private tent. And based on, however, as we're going to learn, that's where Yaakov ended up being. So the Hachaim wants to understand, how could Leah say such a thing? So he explains beautifully. Kavanas Leah al derech ayman. Ki kivias mitase shel Yaakov ha'yetzer Rachel. That Yaakov, on a more steady basis, lived with Rachel. Why? Because Rachel really was his wife, as we're going to learn in a second. But Lezeh Amra, this is why Leah said, if you are medak exactly in the words, Leah's complaint was, I already don't live enough with my husband. You want to even decrease the amount that I live with him even more? Hama'at kachtech es ishi pirsh chelek ha'oidef etzlacha. The extra amount of time that you live with his husband, Nigra mechelek Leah, is going to even take away more time from Leah. Va'imra v'lakachas. Tikaven, what does that mean, v'lakachas? Ki bechinas haleda, the Hachaim teaches us a very important secret, a biological fact, that the more that a Isha is with her husband, not just physically or intimately, but spends time with her husband, the greater the chance that she will become pregnant. The ability to have children, comes about mirov zikuk umiasmadas shchunas abal. The longer you are around your husband, right, even just on a very, non-intimate level, that helps the ability to have children. And that's what Leah's tiny to her was. Not only are you taking the ability to have children by spending much more time with him, you also now want to take my, so to speak, only ability to have this special Dudaim work in my favor. As it says in the Zohar, it's enough that you have the husband more than I do, and that should be a schooler for you. Now you also want to take the thing that works for me. So that was Leah's taina. It wasn't a selfish taina. Leah said, you already have one schooler, so leave me with one schooler. I don't have the ability to be with Yaakov so often, as we're going to see in a moment why, as the Hachaim explains. You already have what seems to be a much more natural and a much more powerful schooler that you spend much more time with Yaakov. So why are you taking it away from me? Which seems to be a very valid point. The time Yaakov, why did Yaakov make a differentiation between Rachel and Leah? Because the relationship that Yaakov had with Leah was that he only had to spend the amount of time required to him apia Torah. Why? Because really he didn't want to marry Leah. He was tricked into marrying Leah. Now he understood that Leah was a tzidkanius, and he understood that Leah was a isha kedosha, and obviously he kept them not only married to her, he lived with her because they had many children, tzaddikim. But klape Rachel was his real wife. Rachel was the one that he wanted. So he felt that he had much more obligation to Rachel than to Leah. It wasn't chas v'sholom that he felt Leah wasn't his wife. Because if he felt Leah wasn't his wife, or if he didn't like her, he couldn't have lived with her. Yet you see that Yaakov did live with her. But klape, the relationship that he had with Rachel, who he felt was his real wife, more so he worked for her for 14 years, right, the 7 first years, and then afterwards he had to work, even though he married her right away, he had to work for love in another 7 years. He felt that he had a much more obligation to be with her. And that's why Leah complained, okay, even if lahalacha, and rightfully you have more time with Yaakov than I do, but at least let me keep the other schooler, the Dudaim, that I can have children. And therefore, Leah says to Rachel, we'll make a switch. I'll live with Yaakov more, and you'll get to Dudaim. L'chein yishkav, right? Based on the Hachaim, we'll switch schoolers, which makes sense. It's not chas v'sholom, a physical demand. It's a schooler demand. Okay, you feel that the school is not working for you, and you want to use my schooler, no problem. So let's switch schoolers. Now, so what is it saying? The word lachein, the Hachaim says, is very interesting. That this was up to Rachel. What does it mean up to Rachel? It's a funny thing, says the Hachaim. How could Rachel make an agreement with Leah? Isn't Yaakov the one who has to decide? So the Hachaim says it seems to be that Rachel, as we're going to learn, had the control over all the arrangements. Yaakov gave Rachel the control since, like we mentioned before, Klape Rachel, he felt that she was his real wife, and obviously he had important halachic obligations to Leah, and chas v'sholom is that he didn't treat her any differently, as we already mentioned before, because if he did, he would not have been able to live with her. But Lamaisa, he said that Rachel is my wife, and she will determine what is the best working arrangement. That's why she said, Lachen Yishkav, so Rachel had the ability to say, okay, you'll have more time with Yaakov Avinu. Or says the Hachaim that the word Lachen is a language of Shvuah. Why? Because this is not something that I can give you with a kinyan, a regular kinyan, because this is not a kinyan-dika thing that you will live more with Yaakov than me. Memela, we have to do something that works, which is a shua. Okay, the pasuk now continues as we continue in the Hachaim. So now we understand the reasoning that Leah demanded that I'll give you the Dudaim and you give me Yaakov. Not chas v'sholom for a physical or a animalistic reasoning, rather was a pure pashut pshat. We each have a school that works for us. I have a school of Dudaim because I don't get enough time with Yaakov. You, who obviously Leah understood was the real wife or the wife that Yaakov wanted, Memele, you get to spend more time with him, which is also school. So if the school is not working for you and you want the other school, let's switch schoolers. So at least let me have a school as well. Why should I have nothing? I should not have the Dudaim and I should not have time with Yaakov. Rachel obviously understood and they agreed. So it wasn't chas v'sholom that they were, horse trading with inappropriate things. It was dvarim shebegedusha, as we're going to see in a second, that Leah all wanted this because she wanted to have more children who were tzaddikim. As we're going to see, that's what happened. According to the way we explained the word lechein, now we understand why Leah went to Yaakov. Because what the Hachaim is bothered, why did Leah come to Yaakov? Let Rachel work out the arrangements. Right? Okay, whatever the arrangements were, now instead of spending more time with me, says Rachel. For the time being, you're going to spend more time with Leah. So what's going on? Why did Leah have to go out to Yaakov? The answer is, she was concerned that Rachel would change her mind. Now, why would Leah Chas V'Shalom change her mind? So, possibly, says certain Mefarshim, we'll see the Hachaim has an explanation, is because Leah was concerned that Rachel would feel that this is not the right way to deal with the tzaddik. At least not to include him. That even though Rachel had the ability to do how she wanted with respect to the living arrangements, Leah was afraid that Rachel would say, maybe that's not the way to treat a tzaddik. Another case is because, as we're going to see, that there was no indication that tonight would be the time that Rachel would be willing to give up the extra time. So therefore, she went ahead on her own and said, I want it to be tonight. Leah was afraid that it would be pushed off to another night. Memela, she said, tonight you're going to have the Dudaim and you're going to live with Yaakov. Let me at least be zrizim magdim l'mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? As we explained, the mitzvah is to have more children. She did a very interesting thing, says the Hachaim, and you need to be the Hachaim to say such an unbelievable thing. Leah was concerned that if Yaakov would naturally come home, it would be to Rachel's tent. Now, what's Leah going to do? She's going to knock on the door, or she's going to peek her head in and tell Yaakov that, I'm sorry, tonight you have to live with me. That would be a very unsneistic thing, and also very embarrassing and uncomfortable situation for Rachel. It's not the right way to do. You knock on the door. Now, we today don't really fully understand this because we Baruch Hashem, we all have, there's one husband, one wife. But in the times of the Gemara, where there were times that men had more than one wives, so it could get to, as we understand, to very uneasy situation. So Leah, in order to prevent this situation, she went ahead and went to Yaakov before even Yaakov had a chance to come home to Rachel, which would then indicate that he was going to spend the night there. Rather, she went ahead and said that this is what happened, this is what we worked out. So tonight is going to be the following arrangement as follows. And if you really think about it, there's a tremendous midah. Because what's Leah going to do? She's going to knock on the door when Yaakov's already sitting down, getting ready to eat, and already has his mind that these were the arrangements, and Rachel would be embarrassed and be ashamed and be uncomfortable. And this is a key point, to plant tzadikim. And Hashem testifies that this is what was her intention, because Hashem says that Hashem listened to Leah and gave her a fifth son, which is Yisachar. Yisachar was one of the biggest Talmidei Chachamim. And not only that, she got a sixth son as well, right? And she got a sixth child, which was Dinah, which should have been Yosef. So you see that from the end result, we see that her initial and total kavana was all l'shem mitzvah. Schar sechaticha. It continues to say that Leah tells Yaakov that I paid for this arrangement. Pirsh nesati zchar lezulas badecha. Oid niskavne shesachar shnei dvarim linav zikah. That the arrangement was twofold. That not only will you be spending, the meal with me, but it will be a living arrangement as follows. Balayla hu. So the Hachaim says the correct diktuk should have been balayla hahu. Why does it say balayla hu? So the Hachaim learns out from here that Yaakov agreed with this arrangement. He understood that she meant it l'shem shemayim. She understood that this was something that Leah did only to have the shvatim, to have tzadikim, and she only did it in a proper manner, which means we'll switch skulas. And he agreed, because if he didn't agree, he could have said, I don't agree to this arrangement. Ultimately, I'm the husband, I don't want to agree to it. And Pasuk Yud Zayin says, which is the key to this entire idea, is Vayishma Elokim Eleah Vatar Vatela Liakov Ben Chamishi. And who is this Ben? Yisachar. Who is this next child? Zvulun. Who is the next child after that? Dinah. So if we see from here that not only did Hashem agree that this was a meritorious act, and Midi Keneged Midi, you're going to have a child, not only a child who's a Talmid Chacham Yisachar, you can have two more children, as a bonus. And Vayishma Lakim, and Hachaim says that Hashem listened to her tefillas, and Hashem said, even though you did this in an unorthodox way, I'm masking to it, and it could be my own chashash, my own insight is, the pasuk says, Eloikim, even Midas Adin, agreed to this idea, and we see from here that Leah was zoicha to have 3 more children, 2 more shvatim, and 1 more child in Dinah, who really would have been Yosef had Leah not mispal. So we see from here, when you use the Hachaim Hakadosh to look at the psukim, we get a true clap picture, right? You can always look at something with a certain perspective, but if you come with the perspective that Leah and Rachel with Noshim Tzidkanias, you obviously have to try to understand the psukim according to that perspective. If you think there were 2 regular people who had personal interests involved, then you'll come out chas v'shalom with the wrong perspective, with the wrong idea to learn the psukim. So comes the Hachaim and it teaches us a beautiful pshat that really Rachel and Leah wasn't that chas v'shalom, they had personal or human interests involved. Rather, there was an arrangement, we'll switch skulas, you'll take your skula, I shouldn't lose out my skula. Rachel agreed, and even Yaakov agreed, and ultimately Hashem agreed, and that's why she was zoicha to have another shevet of Yisachar, followed by another shevet Zvulun, followed by another child, Dinah.